Hi, Wendy. Welcome and hello to our audience. So it's my pleasure to welcome Whynde Kuehn, who is a global leader, industry practitioner, author, educator. She's got a lot of titles in business architecture space, and she is a leader in the digital transformation space as well. Luckily, she happens to be my mentor, and I'm so excited and thrilled for this conversation today. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for getting your story out and stories of amazing women. Just really hats off to you for this effort that you're doing. So I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. So, Wendy, I want to start asking you the very first question. I ask this to everybody, right? So, you've such an accomplished career. You've almost done every possible thing anybody could imagine in business architecture. Your contribution is so immense to this space. So, I'd like to start asking you, from where did this all start? How did you arrive at the stage you are currently? I'd love to hear the story of your journey.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, maybe we first talk about the person that I brought to the journey. So, I'm by nature a very analytical person. All my degrees are in science and sustainability. So, I'm also a big picture thinker, and I also love doing big things. So, I had a coach told me one time that my word is big, and I think that's true. But honestly, when I graduated college, I was lost for a really long time. I was going to be a veterinarian. Long story short, I ended up working in data warehousing and business intelligence back in the heyday, right? So I have some familiarity with these, hype cycles and things of different disciplines. Um, but the journey really starts in earnest with an amazing client, one woman who had a vision in an organization, and I was supposed to be doing a 3-month contract. So the 3-month contract led to one business unit after another in the organization doing business architecture, center of excellence. Fast forward, integrating with IT architecture, software development lifecycle, training thousands of people in the organization. Fast forward, the organization really becomes architecture driven,
Mhm.
driving all of its transformation top to bottom with business and IT architecture. So I've really been along on that whole journey. And while I was, working with clients, also grew my own consulting firm. So at one point, I had 100 business architects working for me before I left and started my own firm. And at that point, really leaned into the discipline of business architecture and how do we take this global. So, my whole journey has been doing, and then what I'll say codifying, right? And I think it's worth saying, you know, I didn't get here intentionally, to be honest, especially in the beginning. I honestly followed my bliss, one effort, one step after another. I enjoyed the curiosity, I enjoyed the learning, I enjoyed the creation, I enjoyed the teaching, I enjoyed the helping people, and then over time the vision really came. I have to say there's a gentleman I used to work with. He's a social entrepreneur in Mozambique. And if there's one thing I learned from him, it's that you don't necessarily get asked or told. Sometimes you just do things. And that was really my journey with business architecture. I saw what needed to be done and I did it. And there was a lot of joy in it for me. So that gets us to today.
This is so amazing. And again, this is a very personal conversation for me, and I'm so thrilled I'm talking to you about this. So this is great. So we learn about like where it started and how you're here today, right? And I'm sure when you started, there was no formal discipline called business architecture because I think you're one of the pioneers of this. Right? So when you started, it was kind of figuring out things to be determined, like what should we call this? Is this really like business architecture? This was not a standalone discipline. What was your thought process then? Like, how did you even think of making this as your mainstream career? What specific actions did you take to kind of shape this industry of business architecture?
Absolutely. And you're exactly right, because it wasn't exactly a thing. Now, I will say that business architecture has its roots in a lot of things. It has some pretty deep roots, right? It has deep roots back in the enterprise architecture, but the business architecture has really expanded and evolved and formalized, right? As part of that, it has its roots in definitions of capabilities and different types of modeling, and it has its roots in things like James Martin, the Great Transition, and value streams came from there. But as I said, you're exactly right. It wasn't formalized at this point, and boy, I can remember those days very clearly because we started, a group of us, bumping into each other in conferences, and they were BPM conferences, they were process conferences. There wasn't even a conference called business architecture at the time, right? So we were finding each other there, and over time, and boy, I can even remember some arguments in those conferences about certain perspectives, but a few of us decided to come together and co-found the Business Architecture Guild. So the Business Architecture Guild is the global not-for-profit association for business architecture, and we co-founded it back in 2010. And the first BizBook, the Business Architecture Body of Knowledge, was published in 2011, which laid down, here are the 10 domains, right? Or here's the scope of business architecture. So while business architecture has deep roots, what happened was people coming together to formalize it. And I have to say that so much has happened. And as I speak with my co-founders, I think we didn't even dream of necessarily where we would be today. Again, the vision kind of came a little bit later. In the beginning, you're just doing what needs to be done. But, at this point for a discipline, there's a lot of formalization that's in place, from certification to training, accreditation, and standards. And we've all come a really long way, and we've done it as a global community, most importantly.
Totally. And that kind of brings me to my next question as to making this a global footprint, right? It's a very tough thing to do, evolving something to make it international. And I'm sure it was not easy for you, right? So I'd love to understand what kind of challenges you faced when you were trying to make this like a standardized global discipline, and how did you navigate those challenges?
Absolutely. I think the biggest challenge comes in the intersections,
Okay.
right? When I think back to some of the earlier days, probably some of our biggest challenges were, how does business architecture fit with process? And how does business architecture fit with business analysis? Those aren't quite as confusing today, but boy, they used to be really, really confusing. And so, how we went about that, again, I have to say, hats off to the Guild on this. We'd create specific focus groups, specific collaboration groups, and we'd bring in people from those different disciplines, and we talk about the integration. I have to say, some of those efforts have gone on for years of hard discussion on how do the disciplines actually work together. But the key to working through this is to define the boundaries of what business architecture is and isn't, and then to define the boundaries of other disciplines, and then we decide how to connect them, both in the architecture or how the roles work together. Now, that's really challenging when, one, you don't have a discipline that has very clear boundaries, right? Then it becomes hard to
Totally.
connect, right? Or two, you have people that might people that have proprietary frameworks, or they've been backing things that they've really invested in, and then we don't want to change. So I'm always a huge believer that there's really not overlaps here. There's partnership, so it's finding where are the integration points, and also how do we find the biggest possible purpose that bonds us all together. It's something that has to transcend all of us.
Absolutely. And I love the way you kind of define that everything needs to have its own scope, right? So the boundaries. So speaking of that, so business architecture is a very big discipline. I can imagine what it was from your standpoint to kind of carve this entire thing out along with some of the other leaders. According to you, what are some of the aspects of this discipline that still needs work? Because I know you've come a long way, pioneering Guild, creating a lot of educational materials for people to consume. there's a lot of work that's already been put into this, but I'd love to understand what are some of the areas of this discipline where people can actually contribute and that needs work, in your opinion?
Absolutely. And this is where we are all needed. And right now, actually, there's never been a better juncture for all of us. And I'll explain. The first area that I think we have some work to do is on the role, on the competencies, on the career path, and on the learning path.
Hmm.
We made an intentional decision to really define what the discipline was and how to use it and what its value was first. And I think it was a good decision, right, in hindsight, because then we had something to lock onto and have those integration conversations that we were talking about too. But now we need to get more concrete on what does the role do, and creating some standard definitions around that. I also think, and this is where we all come in, and I mean all of us, we need to tell our story. It's time to tell our story. We need success stories, because by the way, there are a million success stories out there. They're just not getting told, right? We need success stories. We need, where possible, numbers that speak to people. We need to, I think, start bridging into other worlds and being able to articulate how business architecture helps in other different, usage areas. And I think we need to have conversations with new groups of people. And the big ones are, I think, executives, hiring managers in organizations, and human resource associations, so that they understand what is this role, right? There's a lot of education to do there. And lastly, I think academics. So it's time to really shine, and tell our story, and all of us in organizations keep delivering those successes, keep delivering practical value every day as well, because that is what is really, I think, influencing people and getting them interested in what we can do.
Awesome. And that kind of brings me to my next thought on, we talked about what we need to do. Are there like specific guidance you have for the audience on how they can do that? Because I'm sure a lot of our audience are aspiring to kind of contribute in a way they can in their capacity, but any resources that they can go to, or any materials that they can reference, whether it is influencing an academic curriculum or educating and creating awareness about this discipline with their managers and executives within their organization. So there are different avenues to do that. But I think also any guidance on how they can accomplish this would be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How do we get actionable? Well, let's talk about the academics there for a second, because this is a really interesting one. And I like that you mentioned that. So we've just released some research that was done over the summer 2021 by the MBA Roundtable and the Business Architecture Guild. And just to go right to the heart of the story, it illuminates that there is a gap in strategy execution, as it's being taught in business schools, not taught comprehensively enough, not taught in enough depth. And then, of course, business architecture as an enabler of strategy execution. So it's a very interesting study, and it's actually gaining a lot of traction and interest. So I think this is going to lead to some interesting conversations around curriculum. But what individuals can do, or what businesses can do, is have conversations with their universities. Oftentimes businesses have close partnerships with universities, and again, even students that are applying, ask for strategy execution and business architecture to be part of our education programs, because we see a lot of the statistics of challenges in strategy execution in organizations. So there's potentially a case here that we could be doing more to educate the leaders of tomorrow. But other things that people can do is really, for your success stories, I find a lot of business architects in particular are really humble. Tell your stories, write them down. In your organization, if everybody did nothing other than For every effort that you do, you write 3 paragraphs. What was the situation? How did business architecture help? What did we do? And what were the results? And then you share those in your organization. And where possible, you share those with your communities and peers, or get those stories to the guild or other forums. There's so much we can do by just, sharing that among each other, and just having the conversation in your organization, or having the conversation with your executives. So honestly, those are some of the best things you can do, is just share your passion, share your wins.
I love that. I'm definitely, the follower of that advice, and I recommend and encourage our audience to do so. Share, speak up, advocate. Well, what's next for business architecture, Whynde? Where do you see this profession trending? I know we talked a lot about strategy to execution, so this is kind of a very key pillar. But what's next? What can we expect?
Yeah. Oh, that is a good question. Well, I am really delighted to say that I think, business architecture is here and here to stay. I think you're exactly right, though. I think the strategy execution space is going to be the one to watch. And I think we're seeing enough pickup by executives, even entrepreneurs, even nonprofits, right, in other spaces too, that I think it's going to start gaining more traction. And what that means is, while we've hoped for this, I think it's going to put some good pressure on us too, as practitioners, as leaders of the discipline, because we're going to have to be able to make it simple for other people to understand and to use, right? So hopefully we're going to see more people in organizations consuming business architecture and just becoming more a part of business as usual, more a part of the fabric of how we work. And so again, as a discipline, we'll have to really, decide as more and more people, pick this up, we may have to bend on some things. So we're going to have to really make sure, what do we hold precious, and where are those areas where we can bend to create more adoption. I also think that there is there's a growing conversation that it's going to keep sorting out. And so if we think about business architecture as a little bit of a Venn diagram, right? On one side, we have business architecture as part of strategy execution, but on the other side, it's the tip of the spear for enterprise architecture, and all this sort of scenarios over there, and being part of that umbrella and part of that team. Well, so some of this might go to business school and just business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's going to leave the rest, it's going to leave the other side of the Venn diagram to sort out, well, what part of business architecture should be professionalized, and how do we work closely with our IT architects, partners to do that? Because a profession, to really be a profession, like doctors or lawyers or accountants, it requires some pretty rigorous things. It requires a defined value to society, body of knowledge, certification, all sorts of different things. And so I think that's just something that, in particular business architecture, we're going to have to wrestle with that. Are we ready to step into serious professionalization with the rest of our architecture partners, or are we just seeing this as that other side of strategy execution? So that's going to be a big one to see how it plays out. And together, we'll take the next best step, right?
Awesome. So, Whynde, my last question is, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are aspiring to become business architects. I was one of them a few years ago. I found you luckily. You mentored me and I'm here. I would love to get your insights on what are the resources available for aspiring business architects. How can they find a mentor, learn about this, and then evolve into successful practitioners?
Great question. Well, for sure, the businessarchitectureguild.org, right, is, become a member. Body of knowledge is out there. I think getting certified is a good choice for a lot of people, because it forces you through the rigor, and it gives us all as practitioners, in any way, a common foundation of knowledge. There's an annual summit and things like that. So that's one good place. The second place, and I don't mean to be self-serving, but I did create it for the business architecture community worldwide, which is bizarchmastery.com. And there are 100 articles that break down business architecture piece by piece. There are 100 free graphics for people to use as you socialize. There are podcasts from people like yourselves to listen to. So it's all free and out there for people. And then there's some different programs where we're building some pretty cool community and learning and creating some wonderful exchanges among each other. And beyond that, though, I have had the joy and honor of meeting and working with business architects on 6 continents. And they are amazing people, every single one of them. And that's not hyperbole. I can't think of a business architect that I've met that I didn't think wasn't amazing, right? So you will find that wherever you are on this journey, you're not alone, right? Business architects are they're people that are after a bigger cause for their organizations, their society, world, and they're people that will lift you up. I think that's great to know. So there are a number of local communities around the world, places in the US, places in the UK, places in Central Europe, Australia, South Africa. So there are some local communities, but even if you're not in one of those communities or you don't know where to go, and you know a colleague to reach out to, or even find people on LinkedIn, reach out, because I think you'll find we're very welcoming, and we all started on this journey somewhere, and so I think we're all ready to pay it back and pay it forward. So wherever you are, you're joining an incredible global community, and you're certainly not alone.
That's such a beautiful advice, Whynde. Thank you so much. And thank you for welcoming a lot of people under your umbrella to mentor them, train them, and educate them about business architecture. That sort of brings me to the end of our conversation. This was so amazing. And thank you so much for your time and contribution.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Thank you.